the same space as on Sunday morning, but we have a little more intimate number of people on Wednesday evening here. We need some rain, but we've had some awfully beautiful days and evenings we can be very thankful for. Would you bow with me and we'll begin with a prayer. Our gracious Almighty Father, we thank you for so many gifts. We thank you for beautiful days. We thank you for the life and breath that you've given us. Help us to appreciate these things. Help us to appreciate that you sustain us with food and housing, clothing. These are things that so many people have been in need of through centuries, and we have in abundance. Thank you, Father. Thank you for your word. Help us to be open to it. Help us to let us be taught through it. We pray in your Son's name, and amen. Well, this evening, as you see, we're in Matthew chapter 10. Just a quick reminder, we're mainly just going by chapter now, but next Wednesday we have the meeting, so we'll skip a week. But if you're happen to be reading or wondering where we're going to be, on Wednesday, on Sunday morning, we'll be at chapter 11. So we see these extended teachings of Jesus we saw in this first section of the book, that Matthew seems to divide or construct this in 5 big sections. The first one is the kingdom is coming and it's being revealed and announced. And within that, in fact, at the end of that, then he gives this grand sermon of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. This occurs again in this second section. I'd called it making God's kingdom real in our lives. I think Sterling noted it as bringing the kingdom into people's lives. And so taking it from just words, and putting it in action and letting people see it in action. And we begin to see these miracles performed. And at the end of this, then we see sending out the 12, this great sermon or a set of instructions given that in many ways is set up in the book, in the gospel, much like the Sermon on the Mount is. Sterling mentioned this on Sunday. As you just about work into the Sermon on the Mount, you end this statement in Matthew 23 that Jesus going throughout Galilee, teaching in synagogues, healing, announcing the good news of the kingdom, and how it was spreading, healing people of all sorts of diseases, and large crowds following. Well, chapter 9 and verse 35, it's not an exact quote, but it's certainly very parallel, that he's saying much the same thing. He was going around the towns and villages, teaching in synagogues, proclaiming the gospel, the news of the kingdom, and healing went on. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, and there were crowds. And so one thing you see in this is, almost any work of literature, you begin seeing the same construction multiple times. You begin to see that, well, it's not just us imposing that there's this structure in the book, but it's a good sign that Matthew is intending us to see, hey, I'm coming back to, I'm setting this up again like I did the Sermon on the Mount. One of the things I wanted to quickly pull out of this, and we'll see this again, but within each of these sections, these 5 sections, Matthew includes in most of them several and groups together several miracles. And again, you don't know exactly the choice of them in every case, but as he says, I think here he summarizes what his main purpose is, and that is to show Jesus was healing all sorts of things. And this is going to come back as we get in the next section, chapter 11, that I think Sterling is teaching Sunday on the questions John the Baptist asked. And the response Jesus gives refers in many ways to what Jesus is doing with these miracles. And I think that was specifically to appeal to first century Jewish readers. To them, this would tie in. I think the words of Jesus in chapter 11 tie in closely to the Old Testament prophecies about Messiah. But here I wanted to broaden it just a bit, or a lot, and by saying that I think the miracles for us 2,000 years later and for centuries leading up to us present a problem. How do we evaluate the authenticity of such acts as, raising people from the dead and healing people who are paralyzed? The Bible presents, or the New Testament presents the resurrection of Jesus as the ultimate sign. Jesus refers to it that way. And I think clearly it's the one we can most evaluate, and we're given the most evidence. But these other ones, for many of us who have grown up our whole lives hearing these stories, first our parents tell them to us and then they read them, I don't think we look necessarily as critically as someone who grows up not hearing them. If someone came to you and said, last month I was in Zimbabwe and I saw a person who had been paralyzed for 30 years healed, what would your first reaction be? I doubt it. I'm pretty skeptical of that, if not downright something's not right. And yet we accept these. Well, why? Well, again, without spending a long time on this, but when I was talking with Sterling and Corey about this at a group meeting the other night, and you think about it, what's the nature of these miracles? What kinds of diseases do these people have? Well, life-altering. Things that people external to them could observe, that a person is paralyzed, a person is dead, even demon possession, even though internal to the person was, I think, pretty obvious to the people around them. And so these weren't backaches and headaches, which I don't mean to belittle. Backaches and headaches are real things, but you can't see that. These are things that Matthew says, hey, people could see these things. And these are mostly being done in public. Not all of them, but many of them are done openly and in public. And there are many of them. I think Matthew keeps stressing that. This wasn't just, over here in a corner one time, but this is happening again and again and again. And so in that respect, what's being claimed here is very different from many stories that may have arisen in the 2,000 years since then. Now, I don't have an exhaustive list of such stories and don't know all of them. But many miraculous stories since would be, many of them one-off or only witnessed by that person or a very small number of people. Or, this is something that happened way off in a corner. Somebody finds tablets and only they can understand them and they're interpreting them for other people and those sorts of things. This is nothing like that. Matthew is making claims within the lifetime of people who lived to say, these things were out in the open and they happen so much, they're undeniable. At least I think that's what Matthew is trying to do. And so I think you do have to, if you're a skeptic of this, say, okay, either this person somehow is able to pull off the biggest lie ever, or it really happened. There's really no in between on these sorts of things. All right. Here is the layout of chapter 10. So we get the naming of the 12, and then the spread of the message, these specific instructions. He tells them to be on guard, don't be afraid, I'm not bringing peace, and whoever welcomes you. So those are the main sections. I was thinking of Becky Nix here this evening. Her father used to be one of the people who organized a golf tournament in Texas that I went to regularly, and Jared, I think, came with him when he was younger. So young that I don't know if it was Jared or somebody else's son or grandson, that the question came up, well, what should be the cutoff age? And somebody suggested, sort of jokingly, well, if they could name the 12 apostles, they're in. And then one of the older men spoke up because I don't know how many of us could do that. I have to kind of pair them up. I can get about 6 or 8, and then I start thinking, a couple of them have various names. But this more seriously here, an interesting thing about this section is described well, I think, by this observation. I came across this and I thought it said it better than I could. The present and the future in this chapter, in it so often run together, run into each other. The horizon is gradually enlarging throughout the discourse. But there's no change in the standpoint originally occupied. In other words, the 12 of them. And so the present merges into the future, and the future mingles with the present. And this indeed is also characteristic of much of the Old Testament prophecy, in which the prophet ever a preacher of the present, even while he was foretelling the future. And then if you look back at this layout, you may have to help me here. Oh, yeah. You got to have buttons that say go back. If it just has a button, I'm lost. Okay, there we go. So as we get into this, I think we'll see it's kind of interesting. And it's one of the reasons often I've passed over chapter 10, I'll admit that. I think, well, this is sort of a commission to the 12, and it's not nearly as relevant for me as, say, the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that is true to some extent of the first few verses. I think these are verses specifically for these men, for the 12. And then I think as he goes on, it's for them, but maybe at a later date, not just immediately on this trip. But then as he goes on, it continues, I think, to still be for them, but Jesus seems to be broadening the scope of who could benefit. And Matthew seems to be writing this not just to tell what happened, but probably to help Christians themselves deal with similar settings. And this is one of the challenges of Scripture. Over the years, I've sometimes said, why aren't we all untying donkeys if that's commanded? But we readily say, okay, that's just said to those two disciples. But it's more nuanced here. It's not as obvious as that. And so you do have to think well, what are the things being said specifically to them? And what are things being said to them, but certainly have power and relevance and application in our lives? And I think as you go through this chapter, you'll see that. So he says to them, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Matthew prefaces it. All right, and so if you have your Bibles open to Matthew 10, if we summarize, what are his, I would say, specific instructions?
Go to the lost house of Israel.
Right, just go to Israel. Don't be going to Samaria and to the Gentiles. Yeah, do the things I've been doing. Heal the sick, raise the dead. So they've been given great power on this mission. What else? Yeah, don't take stuff with you. So I've listed a couple of others. Let others of faith take care of you. Teach the kingdom of heaven is very near or close. And so, obviously, you begin looking at this. There's in this instructions for them that are very immediate. Eventually he's going to say in Acts 1, this is going to go to Judea, Samaria, and all the earth. And so this isn't forever. Also, what about the instructions? Should we take this instruction if we go out on some missionary journey? Should we take nothing with us? Well, we've sent Darrell many times to China. They may be listening in this evening, but we've sent him to China. Well, we usually send him with stuff. And he usually carries a suitcase, and no one would think twice about that. But in this case, what do you think is his purpose in giving these specific instructions for this particular mission? Right. I want you now. I want you. And I think also a reliance on the power being given to them, the power of the message, trusting in God. Because really, what's Jesus been doing? Is he really asking them to do anything different than he's been doing? No, really, he's giving them the same mission he has. Now, in many respects, we all have that mission, but there are, I think all of us would agree, there are aspects of that mission that were unique to the 12, and I think we see that here. So, he continues, verse 16, he says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd or as wise as snakes and serpents and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You'll be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you'll be brought before governors, kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, don't worry about what to say. At that time, you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Now again, I think these are instructions for the 12 here. And again, this is where I think people sometimes can get off the rails. You know, they read about, you'll be able to take up serpents. He doesn't say that here, but in other places. And they immediately think, well, hey, Jesus said that. Well, Jesus says things here that I think are particular to them. But what's the time horizon now? You think, what are clues here that this might not just be for this trip? Well, yeah, they're going to appear before kings and governors. Now, many of them are eventually going to do that, but that's years down the road for many of them. And so, again, he begins expanding, as the writer I quoted earlier said, expanding the discourse. But here he's saying, all right, on this trip, as well as in the future, you need to be on your guard. And it's an interesting statement. In another place, Jesus says something similar, something you probably could pull it out of your head. I didn't look it up. But this metaphor of being as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Now, if you've been around snakes much, they are shockingly shrewd, of avoiding things that are going to cause trouble for them. But as innocent as doves, is there any tension in between those two things? Can you be both wise or shrewd and blameless? What'd you?
Snakes eat doves, so it's a little bit of a, why would he use that?
Yeah, snakes eat birds and bird eggs. And so it's a bit of I think, an intentional contrast and a bit of a paradox. I think we were visiting somewhere recently, and the preacher had an excellent lesson on a couple of the parables. And one of the ones, the parable of the shrewd servant who, owes money to his master, so he goes and relieves the debts and doing something he shouldn't do, but at the end, what does the master say? Well, I'm not commending you for what you did, but I'm commending you for at least being wise about doing it, that this was your only option as you saw it. And the preacher made the point, and I think it's a pretty good one. Sometimes I think we equate being full of faith and trying to be pure and blameless and sincere with being naive and simple. And Jesus doesn't equate those two. Now, again, how one works these two things out in practice is not always easy. It's like we study in the paradox class, Proverbs, two Proverbs next to each other, don't speak to a fool, speak to a fool. And so it takes some discretion and judgment to know how to work these two things out together. But again, the point is, be on guard. But he goes on, part of being on guard is to do what? Look down at verse 21. I did not put that up here. He says, Brother will betray brother to death, and father's child. Children will rebel against the parents and have them put to death. You'll be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, what should you do? Flee to another. At that time, I'm at the wrong place. Truly, I tell you, you will not finish. I might hold off the last one. But when you're persecuted in one place, flee to another. Don't be unwise. Sometimes I think we get the idea that, well, if we're really standing up for the cause, we would never run away. But what does Paul do in Antioch? He could have said, bring it on. I'm going to let whatever happens, but they let him down in a basket. Our faith has one primary martyr, and his name is Jesus Christ. Now, others become martyrs, but not because they're choosing to do so, not because they're putting themselves out. Hey, I want to be the next person killed for Christ. And so there's nothing in Jesus' instructions here that say, you stand your ground, you take whatever. He says, if they're not listening or they're going to beat you and persecute you, go on to the next place. It's an interesting point, I think, for not just them, but maybe for us at times. I tell you, and this is the last part of this section I was reading, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now, that's the sort of statement that throws people into sort of theological loops. What does that mean? But again, I think you start thinking about it, as that observation said earlier, he begins looking to the future, but then he bends back more to the present. Now, people often see an expression like the Son of Man comes, and they think, well, that's a reference to the end of time. Others would suggest, no, this is a reference to the end of the Jewish age, or this Jewish age, the destruction of the temple in AD 70. But if you look back, this comes out of Daniel 7. And look, there's a lot in Daniel that one could talk about, and I'm not going to try to do all that this evening. But in chapter 7, he goes through these four beasts, describing kingdoms of the earth that are clearly identifiable with these major kingdoms that end up with the fourth beast, Rome, and the establishment of this kingdom that will be everlasting, the kingdom of God. And as he discusses this, Daniel says, I looked up and thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days, God the Father, takes his seat. Then he drops out down. He says, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. I've highlighted this here, if I can pull it up. One like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. So you get the idea. Well, here's Jesus coming back. But look at what he says next. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. The language here seems to speak more of the Son of Man going to the Ancient of Days in this part than the return of Christ. And that fits. You think about it, what he's saying, you'll not finish going through the towns of Israel till the Son of Man comes. Well, they're not going to finish this job fully, even in Israel, before Jesus ascends back after his resurrection. At least I would suggest that's what Jesus is getting at. He's pulling back to the present. Then he goes on here. He says, so don't be afraid of them, for there's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim it from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who will kill the body but cannot kill the soul. And he says it again. Three times he says, don't be afraid. I didn't add it to the text here. Well, this is very reminiscent of what we talked about in chapter 6 of Matthew, where Jesus says, don't worry about your life. Don't worry what you're going to eat. Don't worry what. Well, how easy is that? Do you just have a button here or a knob that goes, okay, I'm turning off the fear knob. People are hounding me. People are after me. I know people are persecuting me. They want to kill me or kill people or arrest people I care about. But, I've got this button I'm not fearing. It's it's like the don't worry button. There's no such thing. But just like in chapter 6 of Matthew, Jesus gives some dirt to stand underneath this, some foundation. What does he say here? How should we think about that? What should keep us from being afraid? As opposed to, right. They're just men. Men can not only hurt your body, they can kill your body. But what's the point he's making when he says you should fear, his reference is to God, you should fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell? What's he really saying? Or extending, if you extend what he's saying. Let me ask you this way. Who has the real power? Or who has the ultimate power? God. That fear, it's natural to fear something that can hurt you and people who are out to get you and to hurt you. How do you overcome that? Well, one way is to think about they can hurt me, but there is somebody that they answer to. And I think that's what he's getting at here. He says, what you hear in the dark, speak in the daylight, what's whispered in the ear, proclaim from the roofs. He's saying, look, they got power over them. It might not be apparent to them and to many people in the world, but there is a power much more powerful than them. That is the power. Now, we shy away from the idea of, we shouldn't just say we should fear God, because fear, it really means be in awe of and respect. Well, yes, but I think it also means fear. Everybody in the Bible that appears before the throne of God or in some vision, what happens? They cower. John becomes like stone. That God is to be feared. Now, yes, as John said, perfect love pushes out fear, but which of us has perfect love? As we grow in love for the Father, I think that begins to override the fear element. But all of us should recognize, and he doesn't expand on this, but who is God? Tiberius Caesar at this time was probably the most powerful man in the world. But how does Tiberius Caesar stand up against God? And where is Tiberius Caesar now? Nero put Christians on stakes and put oil on them and set them afire. That's a terrible, terrible thing. And there's going to be dread of that. He's not saying you're never going to have, we're hardwired to try to protect our lives. God has built that into us and all other living creatures. But he's saying there's something that you should use to help offset that natural reaction. He also says there's something else. It's not just that we should fear God, but what else does he say? Verse 30. Yeah. Even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth much more than sparrows. Are you not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, yet not one of them will fall to the ground without your Father's care? And this is echoing Matthew 6 on the worry issue. It's hard for this to sink in, I think, with us. Yes, it's in the abstract. I think we think, well, yes, God cares about me. But if he, but I'm in a pinch here, and this person's coming down on me, and they may even kill me. That the idea of God caring for me seems somewhat remote and abstract when you're like that. But he's asking you to think about the things God has made and his care for his creation. This echoes in many ways, well, I could have put that too, acknowledging him. This echoes Isaiah 43 very closely. That Matthew and the other writers do this sometimes they're more or less direct quotes from the Old Testament. Other times you might call them paraphrases or allusions to Old Testament references. Here's from Isaiah 43, but now, Jacob, listen to the Lord who created you. O Israel, the one who formed you says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. What's the idea behind saying that? I don't know everybody's name in here, so I won't try to. But God knows you. God has numbered the hairs on your head. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And we have to, cognitive behavioral therapy really emphasizes how important self-talk is. There's always talk to ourselves going inside our head. Some of us verbalize it more than others. But that talk inside your head needs to be telling yourself, in times of trouble, God really cares for me. When you go through deep waters, I'll be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, Savior. Now, again, obviously that's not true in a purely literal sense. Christians have been burned. Christians have been fed to lions. But he's saying, I will be with you. And he is more powerful. And a first century Jew that read this, I think they would have immediately thought of Isaiah 43. We aren't quite as familiar with this, but I think this was a passage that they would have been very familiar with.
The Old Testament verse that popped in my head was coming from Exodus 4 at the burning bush. This is almost like if the burning bush is talking to these group of Moseses, but giving them kind of a rebuttal before they can even ask a question. It's like, here's this big challenging thing I'm asking you, but let me explain to you how I've already thought of how I will help you, why I need you to do this, and how important you are to me. Even, and I know we kind of brushed by it, but going and acting as witnesses to these kings, governors, and Gentiles, again, this group we just kind of bypassed, for the account of God. They're being asked to do something pretty big and scary, and he is just repeatedly giving them this validation and trying to help strengthen them and grow their faith. And it's just such a loving interaction without them even really saying a word back to it.
Yeah, I think, I'm glad you brought that up, Ethan, that one of the things way back at the beginning of this, I did want to say, I think we should, well, I'm going to hold off and say that. I'm going to follow this up with this next section here. Yeah, Paula.
Well, and he's telling them this before Christ has been crucified.
Mm-hmm.
We now have the assurance that we know how much we mean to God. He gave his son for us.
Right. We see that Jesus Christ is much more powerful than Tiberius Caesar.
Right, and they unfortunately hadn't yet
Yeah.
experienced.
No, from their perspective, these Romans, way down the line from Tiberius, would have seemed very threatening and very powerful. The signs of Roman occupation and oppression would have been in almost any city of any size. Their symbols, their flags, their soldiers. And so this was real. He goes on, kind of one-ups himself here. Well, let me move on here. Then he said, well, let me back up. I back up, go forward. I don't know, Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. So here's motivation number 3. First, God cares for you. He has the real power. But you should also be aware that even under the most dire circumstances, disowning him will cost you. Think about what you're really doing. And so you can see in this begins to expand application and meaning beyond just the 12. It certainly had meaning for them, but now he's beginning to say things that would have relevance for many Christians, especially in the first 3 centuries after Christ died, but many since then too. And he goes further. He says, don't suppose that I have come to bring peace on earth. Now, again, we go back, I can reteach the paradox class. Why is this a paradox or a paradoxical statement? What's the other side of the paradox? Well, what is said to the shepherds on the night Jesus is born? Right. Savior is born to you. Peace on earth. What's one of the titles of Messiah? Prince of Peace. And so again, here's a lesson, just like with the humanity and deity of Christ and many other things, that Scripture presents 2 ideas that sometimes seem in direct contrast. Well, it's up to us to search and think and balance and realize, we may not ever fully reconcile those 2, but we need to embrace both, the deity and humanity of Christ. We need to embrace both Jesus bringing peace and what that means, and yet bringing conflict too. And because it's going to bring conflict not just with you and the Romans or you and the Jewish leaders, but it's also going to bring conflict with your own family.
This is where Daniel 7 really finds some force, both in the previous section and in this section. It's like he is going to the Ancient of Days. And so whoever disowns him, he's going to the Ancient. But by the same token, there are dominions that are in place that need to be taken away with.
Yeah.
And there's going to be conflict.
Yeah, that's a good point. That in passage like Daniel 7, at least implicitly recognize these early kingdoms are not nothing. They have power, but there's a kingdom that's smashing them as we get. But here he goes on and he quotes Micah 7, where Micah is talking about trouble that is and misery that's going to come on Israel. This is 700 years plus before Jesus. And so he says, in this time of trouble, I have come to turn. And Jesus is really paraphrasing here. This isn't a direct quote. He kind of uses it in a way that's useful here. He turns a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And then he adds the kicker. Anyone who loves their father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. So, in these 3 things, again, obviously, Micah nor Jesus is saying every family is going to be set at odds with each other, but many will, especially in these early days. And they're going to face tremendous trouble, and we should have great appreciation for the people of faith, whether in these early centuries or people of faith today who are in circumstances where they and their families are put to the ultimate test of their faith. But he goes on again. This is where this passage, I think, becomes very broad in application. Anyone who loves father or mother more than me, anyone who does not take up their cross, I think there he's referring, doesn't take up the burden that they've been given. Anyone who says, I'm going to save my life by denying him is going to lose their life. What Jesus has called us to is very high. As Ephesians says, walk worthy of the calling to which you've been called. Revelation, you're talking to people who are or about to face tremendous persecution, and yet he says, the one who's listening better listen. Anyone who has an ear better pay attention. I'm not putting my arm around you and say, well, I know it's hard, and if you deny me under these circumstances, well, okay, I get it. No, he's saying this has to matter more than anything. Now, there are still people, even in our country, that will face these sorts of challenges, but I don't think we should be artificially looking for conflict so that we can, well, hey, I've stirred up my family, or I'm, getting tossed. And so for many of us, not maybe everybody, but for many of us, the trouble is this can be very self-deceiving. We can tell ourselves, I love God more than I love my family. Or I'm willing to go through any trouble for Jesus. But that is different than when it comes to the point of decision. For myself, I had to do some soul searching as to what really matters most, and let me put it this way, where am I really putting my ultimate confidence? When our oldest daughter went off to college, she's going to turn 30 on Monday or Sunday, and it seems like just yesterday she did that. But when she went off, and Joey can tell you, I cried for a month. I was like, not only did I know I would miss her, but I just felt like, well, our whole family situation. Our daughters were not just our daughters, and they were very obedient and respectful, but they were our friends. They liked doing things with us. We liked doing things with them. And so it was like losing, one of your best friends leaving, and it's going to disturb the whole thing. And at the end of that month, I began realizing, she will always matter to me. But I realized I had probably invested too much of my foundation in her and our family. It's easy to talk about. We shouldn't invest too much in things. Those are easily. But Ecclesiastes and Jesus and others caution us, and Lawrence has too, about putting so much burden on our families that they can never carry it. And I was doing that to myself. That my daughter, we all recognize, parents pass on. People get sick, friends leave, children sometimes die. If you've got everything invested in this thing that matters, but if you've got everything invested in that, you're going to be let down. Jay?
I was just going to make a comment. I think very much summarizing what I was saying tonight. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 17, after the temptation, it says there, from this point on, Jesus taught repentance. So I think that is the overarching message for the whole thing. I think he says this in chapter 10, verse 7. But you kept going back to Matthew chapter 6. He's saying there, don't seek the temporal things, seek the eternal.
Yeah.
He said, don't fear who can kill you temporally. Fear the one who can keep you out of the kingdom of heaven. Don't fear the temporal things. Fear the one that's in charge of the eternal, right? He who loses his temporal life will gain his eternal life.
Right.
He's listen, read his parables and his messages are always about trying to get us to look away from the temporal and look to the eternal.
Yeah. The challenge in that, and I think books like Ecclesiastes kind of address this, is that we are temporal beings. And the temporal is always going to matter to us. Like the charge not to worry. Well, food matters to us. Family matters to us. And so working out how, again, the extremist among monks or whatever, so, okay, we're going to do this by just we're going to become total minimalist, and temporal things will just be pushed down to their minimum. And I think this kind of, in your point, speaks to getting to those of us who aren't being faced with, you denied Jesus, you're put to death. Okay, well there it becomes very clear what our ordering and priority is. But for many of us, we live lives where the ordering of temporal and spiritual isn't always so obvious to us. And I think he helps us with that. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate your good attention.